At 2:30 in the morning on October 25, 1944, a torpedo left its tube and curved sharply to the left. 20 seconds later, it slammed into the submarine that had fired it. In the darkness of the Formosa Strait, the deadliest submarine in American history was being killed by her own weapon. The men on the bridge barely had time to react. Commander Richard O'Kane shouted for emergency speed and threw the rudder hard over, but the submarine could not outrun her own torpedo. The weapon had been designed to travel at 29 knots. The submarine's maximum speed was barely over 20. There was no escape. The explosion ripped through the stern with devastating force. The blast was so powerful that men as far forward as the control room suffered broken limbs from the concussion. Seawater flooded 3 compartments in seconds. The after torpedo room, the after engine room, and the forward engine room filled with cold Pacific water before anyone inside could escape. The boat went down by the stern, sliding toward the ocean floor 180 feet below. Of the 87 men aboard, 78 would never surface again. This was USS Tang. In just 9 months and 5 war patrols, she had sunk more enemy ships than any other American submarine in the Second World War. Her commander was the highest-scoring submarine ace in United States Navy history. Her crew had rescued downed aviators under enemy guns, penetrated Japanese convoys surrounded by destroyers, and fired torpedoes at ranges so close that experienced submariners considered it suicidal. And now, with her 24th and final torpedo, she had destroyed herself. The weapon that made her legendary had become the instrument of her doom. The story of Tang is not simply a tale of combat success. It is a story of human excellence pushed to its absolute limit, of courage that defied calculation, and of a tragic irony so perfect it seems almost scripted. To understand how this submarine became the most lethal weapon in the Pacific, and how she met her end, we must go back to the beginning. USS Tang was a Balao-class fleet submarine, built at the Mare Island Navy Yard in Vallejo, California. Her keel was laid on January 15, 1943, just over a year after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had drawn America into the war. She was launched on August 17 of that same year, and commissioned on October 15, 1943, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Richard H. O'Kane. The Balao class represented the finest submarine design the United States had ever produced. 120 boats of this class were completed during the war, forming the backbone of the submarine campaign against Japan. These boats featured thicker, higher yield-strength steel in their pressure hulls, raising the official test depth from 300 feet to 400 feet. With a calculated crush depth of approximately 900 feet, Tang would test these limits. During her first war patrol, while evading a Japanese destroyer that was dropping depth charges directly overhead, she exceeded 612 feet, the maximum reading on her depth gauge. The hull groaned and creaked under the tremendous pressure, but she held together. Tang measured 311 feet, 6 inches in length, with a beam of 27 feet 2 inches and a draft of 15 feet 2 inches. She displaced 1,525 tons on the surface and 2,424 tons submerged. 4 Fairbanks Morse diesel engines, each a 9-cylinder opposed piston design, drove electrical generators producing 5,400 shaft horsepower on the surface, propelling Tang at over 20 knots. Submerged, 2 batteries powering electric motors generated 2,740 shaft horsepower for a speed of nearly 9 knots. She carried approximately 94,000 gallons of diesel fuel, giving her a cruising range of 11,000 nautical miles at 10 knots and a patrol endurance of 75 days. Her armament was devastating. 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, could fire a loadout of 24 torpedoes, a mix of Mark 14 steam torpedoes and Mark 18 electric torpedoes. A 4-inch deck gun mounted forward of the conning tower provided surface firepower for finishing off damaged targets or engaging smaller vessels not worth a torpedo. 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft cannon protected against enemy aircraft. Tang carried 87 crew members, approximately 10 officers and 77 enlisted men. She was a weapon of formidable capability, designed to hunt and destroy. But a weapon is only as effective as the man who wields it. And the man who commanded Tang was forged in the most demanding combat crucible the submarine service had ever known. Richard Hetherington O'Kane was born on February 2, 1911, in Dover, New Hampshire, the youngest of 4 children. His father, Walter Collins O'Kane, was a professor of entomology at the University of New Hampshire. His mother's maiden name, Hetherington, became his middle name. Young Richard attended Phillips Academy in Andover before entering the United States Naval Academy in 1930. He graduated with the class of 1934 as an ensign. O'Kane's early career followed the conventional surface Navy path. He served aboard the heavy cruiser USS Chester and the destroyer USS Pruitt before reporting for submarine instruction at the submarine base in New London, Connecticut, in January 1938. This was the turning point of his career. The submarine service was a small, elite community within the Navy, demanding technical excellence, psychological resilience, and the ability to function under conditions of extraordinary stress. O'Kane thrived in this environment. His first submarine assignment was the aging USS Argonaut, a large mine-laying submarine where he served as diving officer and eventually executive officer. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, Argonaut was on patrol off Midway. The boat was later lost with all hands near New Britain in January 1943, a loss that profoundly affected O'Kane and hardened his resolve to fight aggressively. He had served alongside those men, knew their families, and understood that in submarine warfare there were no second chances. In 1936, O'Kane married Ernestine Dorothy Groves, his childhood neighbor from Durham, New Hampshire. They would have 2 children, Marcia and James. Ernestine later described him as a homebody, the father of her children, a man who knew how to cook, and a man who did not have much interest in the medals and honors that came after the war. But during the war, O'Kane was transformed into something else entirely, a hunter of lethal precision and ruthless efficiency. In early 1942, Lieutenant O'Kane joined the pre-commissioning crew of USS Wahoo at Maury Island as her executive officer. This assignment would transform him into the deadliest submarine commander of the war. Wahoo commissioned on May 15, 1942, and O'Kane served through 5 war patrols, the first 2 under Lieutenant Commander Marvin Kennedy, and the remaining 3 under the legendary Commander Dudley Morton, known throughout the fleet as Mush Morton. Morton was unlike any submarine commander the Navy had ever seen. Where others were cautious, Morton was aggressive. Where others waited for perfect shots, Morton attacked. He had an almost mystical ability to read the tactical situation, to anticipate enemy movements, and to place his submarine in exactly the right position at exactly the right moment. And he transformed Wahoo into the most feared submarine in the Pacific. Morton pioneered a revolutionary command arrangement. He had O'Kane man the periscope, while Morton himself ran fire control calculations and directed the overall attack. As fellow officer George Grider observed, few captains other than Mush ever had such serene faith in a subordinate that they could resist grabbing the scope in moments of crisis. This gave O'Kane thousands of hours of hands-on experience as an approach officer, developing the extraordinary shooting eye he would later deploy to devastating effect. He learned to judge range, angle on the bow, and target speed with uncanny accuracy, skills that would make him the most lethal torpedo shooter of the war. Wahoo's 3rd patrol, under Morton, from January to February 1943, in the waters around Wewak in New Guinea, became legendary. Morton reconnoitred Wewak Harbour, fired a down-the-throat torpedo shot at a charging destroyer, and sank multiple transports. Wahoo returned with a broom lashed to her periscope, signalling a clean sweep. The 4th patrol, in the Yellow Sea near the Yalu River and Darren, was even more spectacular. 8 ships confirmed sunk in a 10-day period in dangerously shallow, uncharted waters. O'Kane earned a Silver Star with 2 Gold Stars for his contributions to fire control during this patrol. Morton's core philosophy, that the submarine was a purely offensive weapon, that aggression and calculated risk-taking were the path to victory, became O'Kane's operating doctrine. He absorbed every lesson Morton taught, studied every approach, analyzed every success and failure. When the time came for him to command his own boat, he would be ready. In July 1943, after 5 patrols, O'Kane was detached from Wahoo and ordered as prospective commanding officer of USS Tang, then under construction at Mare Island. Standard practice dictated that successful executive officers receive their own commands to propagate proven talent through the fleet. O'Kane was being sent to apply everything he had learned under Morton. Morton's fate cast a long shadow. USS Wahoo was sunk on October 11, 1943, in Formosa Strait between Hokkaido and Sakhalin, killed by Japanese aircraft and surface forces during her 7th patrol. All 79 crew members died. This occurred just 4 days before O'Kane commissioned Tang on October 15, 1943. He was unaware of the loss at the time. The two men never saw each other again after July. When O'Kane finally learned what had happened to his mentor and friend, the knowledge drove him to fight even harder, to make Wahoo's sacrifice mean something. Physically, O'Kane was described as a compact man of medium height, with light brown, almost rusty hair, a strong jaw, firm set to his mouth, and an open face. A New England Yankee in bearing, sometimes sharp-tongued, energetic, and radiating confidence. He could be blunt and direct. With a changeable temperament his crew learned to read. When he was pleased, the boat ran smoothly. When he was not, everyone knew it. But his competence was beyond question. Captain Edward Beach, author of Run Silent, Run Deep, wrote that there was no doubt Tang was the best, and that most of the rest of us wondered what it was she had that the others did not. By 1944, the Pacific War had entered a new phase. The great carrier battles at Midway in June 1942 and the Philippine Sea in June 1944 had broken Japanese naval air power. American forces were advancing across the Pacific, island by island, driving toward the Japanese home islands. The island-hopping campaign bypassed heavily defended Japanese strongholds, leaving them to wither on the vine while American forces seized airfields and bases closer to Japan. And beneath the waves, American submarines were waging a silent war of attrition that was strangling Japan's ability to fight. Japan was an island nation utterly dependent on imported resources. Oil from the Dutch East Indies, iron ore from Manchuria, rice from Southeast Asia, rubber, tin, bauxite, all had to come by ship. Cut those supply lines and Japan would starve. The submarine force represented less than 2% of the United States Navy's personnel, yet it accounted for 55% of all Japanese shipping losses during the war. These boats hunted alone or in small groups called wolf packs, prowling shipping lanes, intercepting convoys, and sending tankers, freighters, and warships to the bottom. By the end of the war, American submarines had sunk over 1,200 Japanese merchant vessels, totaling more than 5 million tons, plus hundreds of warships including battleships, carriers, and cruisers. It was dangerous work. The submarine service suffered the highest casualty rate of any branch of the American military. Of 288 submarines deployed during the war, 52 were lost. Nearly 20% of all submariners who went to sea never came home. The men who served in these boats knew the risks. They understood that a single depth charge in the right place, a single mechanical failure at the wrong moment, could mean the deaths of everyone aboard. Yet they volunteered for this duty, knowing full well what awaited them. Tang entered this deadly contest in January 1944 and immediately began writing her legend in fire and steel. Her first war patrol took her to the Caroline and Mariana Islands, departing Pearl Harbor on January 22, 1944. After standby rescue duty off Wake Island from January 29 through February 5, she was ordered to patrol north of Truk, the heavily defended Japanese naval base. On February 17, 1944, Tang made her first kill. Tracking a convoy northwest of Truk by radar at 31,000 yards, O'Kane maneuvered for a submerged periscope attack and fired 4 bow torpedoes at 1,500 yards. 3 struck the Army cargo ship, Gyoten Maru, 6,854 gross register tons, which sank by the stern. Tang had drawn first blood. The second patrol area, near Saipan, proved even richer. On the night of February 22, Tang intercepted a convoy en route from Saipan to Yokosuka. O'Kane conducted a night surface attack, approaching under cover of darkness with radar tracking the enemy ships. He fired 4 bow torpedoes at 1,500 yards. All 4 hit the auxiliary gunboat Fukuyama Maru, 3,581 tons, which disintegrated in a massive explosion that lit up the night. Continuing against the same convoy, Tang sank the auxiliary repair ship Yamashimo Maru, 6,777 tons, early on February 23, with 3 torpedo hits at 1,400 yards. On February 24 and 25, 2 more vessels fell, the cargo ship Ekizen Maru in a night surface attack, and the auxiliary store ship Choko Maru, 1,794 tons, in a submerged attack at an audaciously close 500 yards. O'Kane was already demonstrating the aggressive close-range tactics that would become his signature. Tang fired 24 torpedoes on this patrol, scoring 16 hits, a 67% hit rate that was exceptional by any standard. 5 ships confirmed sunk for approximately 21,400 tons. The patrol was classified as successful, and O'Kane was establishing himself as a commander of remarkable skill. Tang's second patrol, departing midway on March 16, 1944, took her to waters west of Palau and east of Mindanao, before being ordered to Truk for lifeguard duty during major carrier airstrikes on the Japanese stronghold. American aircraft carriers were launching massive attacks against Truk, and downed aviators needed rescue. From April 29 through May 1, 1944, Tang rescued 22 downed naval aviators during the carrier strikes on Truk Lagoon, a record for the most airmen rescued by a single submarine in one mission. The rescues required uncommon bravery. O'Kane maneuvered his submarine dangerously close to the heavily defended Japanese fortress, surfacing within range of shore batteries and enemy aircraft to pull desperate aviators from the water. The most dramatic rescue involved a Vought OS-2U Kingfisher floatplane that had landed inside Truk Lagoon to pick up downed airmen, but could not take off with 9 aviators aboard. The little floatplane simply could not lift the combined weight. It taxied out toward Tang, bouncing across the waves with its overloaded human cargo. O'Kane brought Tang alongside and took all 9 aboard, then submerged and slipped away before the Japanese could respond. No enemy ships were sunk on this patrol, but Tang earned her first Presidential Unit citation for the Truk rescue operation. O'Kane received a Legion of Merit with Combat 5. 22 American airmen were alive because Tang and her crew had risked everything to save them. Tang's third patrol, in the East China Sea and Yellow Sea, became the most productive single submarine patrol of the entire war. Departing Pearl Harbor on June 8, 1944, in company with USS Ceylon and USS Tinosa for a coordinated patrol, Tang arrived in her operating area by late June. The Yellow Sea was dangerous water, shallow and heavily patrolled, but it was also a hunting ground where Japanese shipping was concentrated. On the night of June 24, 1944, O'Kane intercepted a large convoy emerging from the Koshiki Straits southwest of Kagoshima. At least 6 large ships, surrounded by approximately 16 escorts in 2 circular screens. The odds were overwhelming. Any conventional submarine commander would have shadowed the convoy and waited for a better opportunity. O'Kane was not a conventional submarine commander. In a display of breathtaking audacity, Tang penetrated between the quarter escorts on the surface, slipping through the outer screen in the darkness. She gained a firing position, 2,500 yards abeam, of the convoy's last section. O'Kane fired 3 torpedoes at a large freighter and 3 at a tanker. The results exceeded expectations. Post-war Japanese records revealed 4 ships sunk from this single engagement: Tamahoko Maru, 5,600 tons, Tainan Maru, 3,200 tons, Nasusan Maru, 4,400 tons, and Kenichi Maru, 1,900 tons, totaling approximately 15,100 tons. A modern destroyer escort chased Tang at high speed. O'Kane drove her to 22.5 knots on the surface before making a crash dive when the pursuer illuminated with searchlight. Depth charges followed, but Tang escaped. This engagement carried a tragic dimension unknown to Tang's crew at the time. Tamahoko Maru was carrying 772 Allied prisoners of war, 197 British, 42 American, 258 Australian, and 281 Dutch. 560 prisoners of war perished when the ship sank in less than 2 minutes. O'Kane and his men learned of this only after the war. They had done their duty, but the enemy's use of prison ships to transport captives through submarine-infested waters had turned a legitimate attack into an accidental massacre. Over the following 10 days, Tang systematically hunted the Yellow Sea like a wolf in a sheep pen. On June 30, O'Kane sank the cargo ship Nikin Maru, 5,800 tons, with a single torpedo fired at 750 yards, a demonstration of supreme confidence in both gunner and weapon. On July 1, 2 more ships fell. The escort freighter Taiyun Maru No. 2 at 1,900 tons and Takatori Maru No. 1 at 900 tons. the latter destroyed in a moonlight periscope attack at 500 yards that detonated her cargo of munitions in a spectacular explosion. On July 4, Independence Day, Tang sank the large aircraft transport Asukazan Maru, 6,886 tons, in water so shallow the fathometer showed as little as 2 fathoms under the keel. The bottom was almost scraping Tang's hull. Then she destroyed the large freighter Yamaoka Maru in a moonlight attack. Another cargo vessel fell on July 4 through 5, exhausting Tang's last torpedoes. 10 ships sunk for approximately 39,160 tons, a record that no American submarine would equal. Tang earned a second Presidential Unit citation for what was described as one of the most devastating patrols carried out against Japanese shipping during the war. Tang's fourth patrol took her into the most dangerous operating area possible, Japanese home waters off the southern coast of Honshu, near Omaezaki. Departing Pearl Harbor on July 31, 1944, O'Kane pressed attacks with characteristic aggression against ships operating within sight of the Japanese homeland. On August 11, Tang sank the freighter Roko Maru with a torpedo that apparently exploded in her boilers, disintegrating the vessel instantly. Tang endured 38 minutes of depth charging in the aftermath, the explosions shaking the boat and threatening to crush the pressure hull. On August 14, O'Kane attacked a patrol yacht with deck gun fire, the crew manning the 4-inch gun and scoring 8 direct hits. On August 23, the transport Tsukushi Maru went down after 2 torpedo hits. On August 25, 3 stern torpedoes at 600 yards destroyed the tanker No. 8 Nanko Maru, which disintegrated on impact. Tang then endured 68 depth charges while withdrawing, the most punishing attack she had yet survived. With all torpedoes expended, Tang returned to Pearl Harbor on September 3, 1944. 4 patrols completed, ships sunk beyond counting, and still O'Kane's greatest battle lay ahead. And then came the 5th patrol, the final patrol, the patrol from which Tang would never return. Tang departed Pearl Harbor for the last time on September 24, 1944, topped off fuel at Midway on September 27, and headed alone for the Formosa Strait, also known as the Taiwan Strait. She carried 24 Mark 18 Model 1 electric torpedoes, the newer wakeless design that left no bubble trail to reveal the submarine's position. O'Kane had been offered the choice of joining a coordinated attack group or operating independently. Characteristically, he chose to go alone. On October 6, Tang weathered a full typhoon with barometric pressure dropping to 27.80 inches of mercury and waves breaking over the raised periscope. The submarine pitched and rolled violently in the massive seas, but she weathered the storm. She entered the Formosa Strait after dark on October 10, rounding the northern tip of Formosa past Keelung. On the morning of October 11, Tang made radar contact on a heavily loaded freighter 4 miles west of Pukikaku. O'Kane dived for a submerged dawn attack and fired 3 bow torpedoes at 800 yards. 2 hits sank Joshu Go immediately. That same night, Tang tracked a second northbound freighter along the coast in a remarkable 27-mile submerged pursuit, a stunning feat of submarine seamanship. At 2100 hours, O'Kane fired a single torpedo at 500 yards, a hit that sent Oita Maru to the bottom before most of the fire control party could reach the bridge. Days of searching followed, punctuated by the distant fires of United States carrier strikes on Formosa. An SJ radar failure on October 21 forced Tang north for repairs, completed by the evening of October 22. At 00:50 hours on October 23, Tang's repaired radar detected a convoy where no land should be. This was convoy U-03, running from Fuzhou to Takao in Formosa, transports and escorts making their way through dangerous waters. O'Kane executed one of the most audacious surface attacks of the war. When a patrolling escort moved out to investigate Tang's radar contact, O'Kane slipped into the escort's vacant position just ahead of the convoy, zigzagging with the formation at 3,000 yards. The Japanese had no idea that a submarine was now part of their formation. He then dropped back between the transports and stopped, turning for nearly straight bow shots as the targets paraded past in the darkness. 5 torpedoes fired in rapid succession, 2 under the stack and engine room of the nearest transport at 300 yards, 1 into the stern of the middle transport, 2 under the stack and engine space of the far transport at 800 yards. Torpedoes were exploding before firing was completed, all hit as aimed. 3 targets blazed and sank. O'Kane later wrote that it was a terrific sight to see 3 blazing, sinking tankers, but there was only time for just a glance. Then chaos erupted. Boatswain's mate Bill Leibold spotted a transport bearing down to ram. Boxed in by sinking ships with no room to dive, O'Kane crossed the transport's bow, barely getting inside her turning circle. The transport was forced to continue swinging to avoid another vessel that was also trying to ram, and the 2 Japanese ships collided with a grinding crash of steel on steel. Tang immediately fired 4 stern torpedoes spread along their combined length at 400 yards. 1 ship sank nose down almost instantly. The other hung with a 30-degree up angle before a violent explosion 6 minutes later sent her beneath the surface. Total elapsed time from first torpedo to final explosion, approximately 10 minutes. Japanese records confirmed the sinking of Tatsuju Maru and Wakatake Maru, with Town Maru damaged, set afire, and eventually declared a constructive total loss with 131 troops killed. On the evening of October 24, Tang surfaced and headed for Turnabout Island. On approaching the islands, her radar screen was absolutely saturated with contacts. O'Kane had found a massive Japanese convoy, tankers and transports heavily loaded, many carrying aircraft on deck, all supporting the Philippine campaign. This was a target of strategic importance. Tang attacked on the surface. O'Kane fired 2 Mark 18 torpedoes, each at 2 3-deck transports, and 2 at a large modern tanker. All hit. He then turned and fired stern torpedoes. The tanker, apparently loaded with aviation gasoline, blew up in a massive fireball that turned night into day. A charging destroyer intercepted one of Tang's torpedoes, or was struck by friendly fire from escorts firing blindly, and exploded. 2 large vessels confirmed, sunk, Matsumoto Maru at 7,024 tons and Ebara Maru at 6,957 tons. Only 1 target remained, a damaged transport dead in the water, her engines silenced, her crew abandoning ship. Tang had expended 22 of her 24 torpedoes with deadly precision. 2 remained in the bow tubes. The crew carefully rechecked both weapons, verifying that they were properly set and ready to fire. At approximately 02:30 hours, on October 25, 1944, Tang returned to finish the crippled transport. 9 officers and men stood on the bridge, including Commander O'Kane. The night was dark, the sea relatively calm. The 23rd torpedo was fired at approximately 900 yards. It ran hot, straight, and normal, and struck the target. Then O'Kane fired torpedo number 24, the last Mark 18 electric torpedo aboard. What happened next determined Tang's fate in less than half a minute. The torpedo curved sharply to the left, broached, porpoised, and circled. The rudder mechanism had jammed, sending the weapon on a continuous left turn back toward its own ship. O'Kane ordered emergency speed and threw the rudder over hard, attempting to swing Tang clear. Approximately 20 seconds elapsed between firing and impact, barely enough time to react, let alone escape. The evasive maneuvering shifted the point of impact from amidships to the stern. Instead of a direct center hit that would have killed everyone instantly, the torpedo struck abreast the after torpedo room. The explosion was catastrophic. Men as far forward as the control room received broken limbs from the concussion. The after 3 compartments, the after torpedo room, the after engine room, and the forward engine room, flooded instantly with cold Pacific water. Tang went down stern first. A quick-thinking sailor in the control room flooded number 2 main ballast tank to level the boat, and she came to rest on the ocean floor at 180 feet. Of the 9 men on the bridge, 3, including O'Kane, were washed into the sea. 5 perished instantly or drowned within moments. Lieutenant Lawrence Savadkin, the assistant approach officer who had joined Tang for her final patrol, escaped from the flooded conning tower through an air bubble, swimming approximately 100 feet to the surface. Below, approximately 30 surviving crew members fought their way forward through smoke-filled, partially flooded passageways to gather in the forward torpedo room. A Japanese patrol vessel dropped depth charges overhead, and the concussions triggered an electrical fire in the forward battery compartment. Paint on bulkheads began scorching, melting, and running down the walls. Toxic fumes filled the air. Time was running out. Beginning around 0600 hours, 13 men attempted escape through the forward torpedo room, escape trunk, using Momsen lung-breathing apparatus, rubber rebreather devices that allowed a submariner to breathe while ascending through water. This was the only known operational use of Momsen lungs to escape a sunken submarine in the history of the United States Navy. The trunk had to be pressurized to match the 180-foot depth, causing severe pain for some men as the pressure squeezed their bodies. Escapees were instructed to ascend slowly, stopping every 10 feet and counting to 10, allowing the nitrogen in their blood to dissipate and prevent the deadly bends. Of the 13 who entered the escape trunk, 8 reached the surface. Of those 8, 5 survived long enough to be rescued. The others succumbed to air embolism or exhaustion in the dark waters. By the time the last man exited, the heat from the battery fire was unbearable. 9 men survived out of 87, 3 bridge survivors who swam through the night, 1 conning tower escapee, 5 men who ascended from the ocean floor through the escape trunk. 78 men died. The 9 survivors were picked up on the morning of October 25 by a Japanese frigate from the very convoy Tang had attacked. Aboard were burned and mutilated survivors of Tang's handiwork, men who had been on the ships Tang destroyed. The Japanese beat and kicked the Americans savagely. O'Kane later wrote with remarkable equanimity that when we realized our clubbings and kickings were being administered by the burned, mutilated survivors of our own handiwork, we found we could take it with less prejudice. The prisoners were transported first to Formosa, then to Japan. They were held at Ofuna, a Japanese Navy interrogation and detention center near Yokohama, classified as special prisoners rather than regular prisoners of war. The Japanese regarded American submarine attacks on merchant shipping as war crimes, and submariners received treatment even worse than typical prisoners: severe beatings, starvation rations, intense interrogation about United States submarine tactics and technology. Later, the survivors were transferred to Omori, a regular army prisoner of war camp near Tokyo Bay. Conditions were brutal throughout. The prisoners received starvation rations, typically a small bowl of rice and thin soup that provided barely enough calories to sustain life. They were forced to perform hard labor, despite their weakened condition. Disease spread through the crowded barracks. The guards administered beatings for the slightest infractions, or sometimes for no reason at all. Clayton Decker, one of the men who escaped through the Momsen lung, found himself sharing a cell with Major Gregory Boyington, the famous Marine fighter ace known as Pappy, commander of the Black Sheep Squadron, who had been shot down over Rabaul in January 1944. The 2 men, both heroes of the Pacific War, survived together in that miserable place. At liberation, O'Kane weighed less than 100 pounds, his body ravaged by scurvy and beriberi, vitamin deficiency diseases caused by the inadequate diet. All 9 survivors bore the physical and psychological scars of their captivity. They had endured 10 months of imprisonment, not knowing whether they would ever see their families again, not knowing whether their country was winning or losing the war. Omori was liberated on August 28, 1945, just days before the formal Japanese surrender on September 2. American forces had dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima on August 6 and Nagasaki on August 9, finally forcing Japan's surrender. Remarkably, all 9 Tang survivors lived to see freedom. O'Kane was immediately transferred to the hospital ship USS Benevolence due to his critical condition. Lieutenant Savadkin gave the first public account of Tang's fate to an Associated Press correspondent in Guam around September 7th, revealing for the first time that Tang had been sunk by her own torpedo. The news shocked the American public, which had followed the exploits of the submarine force with pride but knew little of the dangers these men faced. The weapon that killed Tang, the Mark 18 electric torpedo, was an American copy of the German G7E torpedo, developed by Westinghouse Electric under a contract signed in May 1942. Westinghouse delivered the first test models just 15 weeks after starting work. The Mark 18 was 20 feet long, weighed over 3,000 pounds, carried a Torpex warhead of approximately 575 pounds, ran at 29 knots to a maximum range of 4,000 yards, and cost approximately $2,500, 1/4 the cost of a Mark 14 steam torpedo. Its great advantage was invisibility. Unlike the bubble-trailing Mark 14, the electric Mark 18 produced no visible wake, making it nearly impossible for lookouts to detect and untraceable to the firing submarine. By late 1944, more Mark 18s were being fired than Mark 14s. Its critical disadvantage was the absence of anti-circular run protection. Surface ship torpedoes had anti-circular run collars. Submarine torpedoes deliberately did not, based on a theoretical and never practically used scenario where a submarine under depth charge attack might fire a circling torpedo to hit an attacker overhead. A circular run occurs when a torpedo's gyro steering mechanism fails to straighten the weapon's course after the initial turn to target bearing. The torpedo continues turning until it returns to its point of origin. At least 30 documented cases of circular runs occurred during the war. 2 submarines were definitively lost to their own torpedoes. USS Tullyby on March 26, 1944, off the Palau Islands, with 79 killed and 1 survivor. And Tang. The Mark 18's problems were part of a broader and more damaging pattern. The Mark 14 steam torpedo, the submarine force's primary weapon, entered service harboring 4 major defects that took nearly 2 years to identify and fix, largely because each defect masked the others, and because the Bureau of Ordnance stubbornly refused to acknowledge any fault in its weapons. The torpedoes ran approximately 10 to 11 feet deeper than set. The magnetic exploder detonated torpedoes prematurely due to variations in Earth's magnetic field between test locations and Pacific combat zones. The contact exploder's heavy firing pin jammed under the inertial forces of direct hits, meaning the better the shot, the more likely a dud. And the gyroscope failures caused torpedoes to curve back toward the firing submarine. An estimated 80% of torpedoes failed in 1942. Submarine commanders reported perfect attacks producing no results, and the Bureau of Ordnance blamed the operators rather than the weapons. It took the near mutiny of the submarine forces commanders and the direct intervention of fleet admirals to force the Bureau to acknowledge and fix the defects. Once all problems were corrected by late 1943, sinkings of enemy ships rose dramatically. But the institutional arrogance that kept defective weapons in service for nearly 2 years, while submarine crews died firing them directly, contributed to the deaths of 78 men on Tang and 79 on Tullyby. Tang's exact record depends on which accounting system is used. The Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee credited Tang with 24 ships, sunk for 93,824 tons. Under these conservative figures, Tang ranked second by ships sunk and fourth by tonnage. More recent scholarship, drawing on Japanese government records not available to the earlier committee, has credited Tang with 33 ships, sunk for 116,454 tons. Under these revised figures, Tang ranks first among all United States submarines in the Second World War, in both ships sunk and tonnage destroyed. Tang averaged 1 enemy ship sunk every 11 days of combat operations, a rate twice that of any other American submarine. Her third patrol's 10 confirmed sinkings remain the record for most ships sunk on a single patrol. On her final patrol, she fired 24 torpedoes with 22 hitting enemy ships, a 92% hit rate that stands as one of the most remarkable gunnery performances in naval history. On March 27, 1946, President Harry Truman presented Richard O'Kane with the Medal of Honor at a White House ceremony. Truman remarked that he would rather have a Medal of Honor than be President of the United States. The citation recognized O'Kane for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. O'Kane's total decorations constituted 7 awards of the nation's 3 highest decorations for valor: 1 Medal of Honor, 3 Navy Crosses, and 3 Silver Stars. He also received a Legion of Merit with Combat 5, Purple Heart, and Prisoner of War Medal. USS Tang received 2 Presidential Unit Citations and 4 Battle Stars. O'Kane's post-war career included command of the submarine tender USS Peleus, testimony at Japanese war crimes trials in Tokyo, service as officer in charge of the submarine school at New London, and command of Submarine Squadron 7. He was promoted to captain in July 1953 and retired in July 1957. Simultaneously advanced to Rear Admiral on the retired list based on his combat awards. In retirement, O'Kane wrote 2 books that became classics of submarine literature. Clear the Bridge, published in 1977, covered all 5 of Tang's war patrols. Wahoo, published in 1987, covered his service under Morton. O'Kane suffered from Alzheimer's disease in his final years, and his daughter recalled that he carried tremendous survivor's guilt to the end. He died on February 16, 1994, in Petaluma, California, at age 83. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His wife, Ernestine, who survived him until 2008, rests beside him. Tang's legacy endures in ways both tangible and spiritual. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans houses Final Mission, the USS Tang submarine experience, an interactive exhibit where visitors enter a simulated submarine, receive a card matching one of the 87 crew members, and experience the events of Tang's final battle. A wall displays photographs of all crew members with their fates, survivor or lost, connecting modern Americans to the young men who fought and died in the Formosa Strait. The O'Kane cribbage board represents one of the submarine force's most cherished traditions. During Wahoo's fourth patrol in 1943, Morton dealt O'Kane a perfect 29-point hand, the rarest occurrence in cribbage. That night, Wahoo sank 2 freighters, and the perfect hand became a symbol of good fortune. The original board was lost with Tang. In 1957, the crew of the successor submarine USS Tang presented a replacement to Admiral O'Kane. Since his death in 1994, the board has been carried aboard the oldest fast-attack submarine in the United States Pacific Fleet, transferred to the next upon each boat's decommissioning. The destroyer, USS O'Kane, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, was christened in 1998 at Bath Iron Works in Maine, and named in his honor. The successor submarine USS Tang, lead ship of her class, was launched on June 19, 1951, sponsored by Ernestine O'Kane, and commissioned on October 25, 1951, the 7th anniversary of the original Tang's loss. That date was chosen deliberately, transforming a day of tragedy into a day of renewal. The wreck of Tang lies in the Taiwan Strait at 180 feet of depth, designated as a United States Navy war grave. The currents that flow through those waters carry no memory of the battles fought there, no echo of the explosions that lit the night. But the hull of Tang remains, slowly being claimed by the sea, a silent monument to the men who served aboard her. Among those entombed within her hull was Reuben McNeill Ryford, who at age 15 may have been the youngest American military member to die in combat during the war. He lied about his age to enlist, served with distinction, and died alongside his shipmates in the darkness of the Formosa Strait. Tang's story compresses an extraordinary arc of human experience: mechanical genius and mechanical failure, supreme courage and arbitrary fate, tactical brilliance undone by a single defective rudder mechanism. O'Kane fired 24 torpedoes on his final patrol. 22 found their targets, 1 missed. The 24th killed his own boat. No novelist would dare invent such symmetry. The institutional failure matters as much as the individual tragedy. The Bureau of Ordnance's refusal to install anti-circular run devices on submarine torpedoes, devices already standard on surface ship weapons, directly caused the deaths of 78 men on Tang and 79 on Tullibee. These deaths were not the unavoidable costs of war. They were the preventable consequences of bureaucratic arrogance. Yet Tang's story is ultimately one of human excellence prevailing against flawed tools. O'Kane and his crew took weapons that were slower, shorter ranged, and less reliable than the enemy expected, and used them with a precision and audacity that produced the single greatest combat record in American submarine history. The 5 men who ascended from 180 feet through black water with nothing but rubber breathing bags demonstrated a courage no less remarkable than any combat action. All 9 survivors endured 10 months of brutal captivity and lived to tell their story. The men of Tang served with distinction, fought with valor, and died together aboard the most successful submarine America ever sent to war. 78 sailors went to sea and never came home. They were fathers, sons, brothers, husbands. They knew the risks when they volunteered for submarine duty, and they accepted those risks without complaint. They faced impossible odds and paid the ultimate price. Today, their story lives on in the museums that preserve their memory, in the ships that bear their names, and in the traditions of the submarine force they served so well. The submarine service motto is still on eternal patrol, a phrase that captures both the endless vigilance required of those who serve and the eternal rest of those who gave their lives. The men of Tang are on eternal patrol now, their duty done, their sacrifice remembered, and as long as we tell their story, they will never be forgotten.